Hey, good evening. Here we are, June 13th, Monday, Neuro at Night. We're pretty open to whatever anybody brings forth, so everybody's unmuted at this point. And I invite you to think about what would you like us to talk about. We have a wide range of topics, and I see a number of people here who are always willing to ask a question or bring something up. So feel free to chime right in. I'm going to give you a minute to think a minute about what you might want to talk about. I'm sorry for the disappointing. I think we're all interested in this, the map, brain maps of violent offenders. It certainly is a terrible situation in our world. But I want Rob, we all want Rob here to participate in it.
Yeah, since he's an author, a major author in that area.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Hey, Judy, this is Bree.
Hey, Bree, nice to hear your voice.
Yeah. I'm always interested in any updates on long COVID and anybody working with clients. I know a few people who are struggling terribly years after getting COVID. And and I know from what we've discussed here how the impact on the brain can be pretty intense. I was just wondering if somebody has had experience and follow through, a year after the fact and such.
Well, that's a great topic. I know
Yeah.
I don't really do measurements in terms of like how long ago were people's COVIDs, but so many people come in and describe this brain fog that I get a lot of in my office, that is a post-COVID thing, and a weariness, a real weariness, but it's not anything that that I've documented as far as numbers go.
Yeah, most of my clients who got it are over the severe anxiety. It lasted a few months in some. And at least more than half of them are over the extreme fatigue. But there's one who did have pre-existing issues, who literally hasn't gotten out of bed 2 years after the fact. And so I know that it can be, and she's part of a huge support group on Twitter of a lot of long COVID people who feel very misunderstood, like it's not a topic anybody wants to really discuss or that many people don't believe in. And so a lot of these people are just battling with what sounds like a form of extreme chronic fatigue and getting very little support from their doctors or their community or their friends. Everybody's like, let's move on from the virus, whatever. So that's why I was just wondering, I would imagine that neurofeedback would be one of the exceptions in terms of seeing it on the actual map and validating people.
Yeah, remember chronic fatigue was not validated either. You remember that, Bree? Nobody.
Absolutely.
Really,
I remember that in the 80s with lupus, chronic fatigue, Epstein-Barr, all of these people were considered like mentally ill.
Lyme's disease.
Yes.
I mean, it goes on. There's very little understanding. Of course, we're all wired to survive. Who wants to even talk about the possibility that any of us may not be able to get up tomorrow and, go to our jobs or survive? I think it's a very scary topic, but I think as long as it's still that scary in society, we're not coming up with great cures. And neurofeedback has always had, the compassion to, like even TBI, right? I mean, barely getting acceptance. So many of these vets and athletes are, killing themselves more out of shame and discouragement, So anyhow, I do think long COVID, from what I hear from this friend, it is starting to suffer some of those stigmas.
Really, it's kind of stigmatized, you think?
Oh, yeah, she said that all these people feel like they're, because, she's in a support group on Twitter, they're all like the severely impacted ones, like the ones who
Oh,
can't go back to work, can't perform their family duties in the same way. And you know how it is most of the time, as Judy said, you're either called crazy or a hypochondriac or you're trying to get attention. It's not, extreme fatigue is just not something that we know how to wrap our attitudes around, because we feel pretty helpless, I think, in knowing what to do about it.
well, that's an interesting side of it, isn't it? Because when you have somebody and there doesn't seem to be any immediate solution, um, they, if you're a spouse or or a family member, you feel helpless and you don't know what to do, and you just sit there and watch them, and then you get frustrated, right? Because you don't know
Yeah,
what to do, and
yeah,
then you have to care for them to some degree,
that's it. And
and
their
that's
doctor
demanding.
doesn't have great, the doctors are sort of limited as well. So it's sort of like, right, family members are not feeling like they're equipped. And, the New Age had its impact in American culture of mind over matter. There's a lot of woo woo, of judging people who just aren't up to the same standard they used to be.
Yeah, go as fast as you can, drink a lot, do a lot of coffee to get up in the morning, and die young, having destroyed your health,
Yeah. Well,
overworking yourself.
ableism, I'm more and more aware of ableism. I mean, it's a kind of a funny word, but, ageism and ableism are now really big deals, because even in how people handle Alzheimer's, like the children of people just try to sometimes immediately take over, and they start treating their parent like a unruly child, and
Yeah.
sometimes even at the very first sign, and so I've had to help some of these people to actually stand up for their rights, and some of them have gone back to the doctor and gotten their driver's license back. It's not the role always of a family member to call the shots. And I think there's so much fear in our culture about, granted, of course, the doctor being aware of the risks of people on the road and needing to assess correctly. But what I'm saying is there's so much fear in our culture surrounding, not being at, as you said, optimum performance.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what we that's what we all want to be, as optimal performers, because we live in a meritocracy, and it's one of the greatest compliments you can get. And then we reward people at work and everywhere else, and the Olympics, for being optimal performers, and everybody else sits on the sidelines, right?
Well, and
Um,
I wonder if we've gone too far in a black and white attitude. You're either a great, wonderful, participatory citizen, or you're a loser. There's like not a
yes.
whole lot in between.
Oh, it's very true. We have cultural beliefs, and they shape our health, and the health of others as well. How people, respond to our attitudes. I was just reading a book, Breaking the Age Code. It's a New York Times bestseller, where social psychologists found that up to 30 and 40% of the health and cognitive functioning of people is determined by the culture they grow up in, the attitude of that culture about aging individuals.
Right.
And she's got decades of large studies that she's done archival work on, that demonstrate this powerful effect of what you believe about the aging person, or what you believe you're going to be like as an aging person. That
Wow.
literally determines your fate. When you look at the statistical analysis of this, and she's got really good studies published, really well done, and she's revolutionizing the way people think about old
Wow.
age.
Yeah,
But
right.
don't you think that applies to people with chronic illness too? What do we believe
Exactly.
about them? And what do they
Right.
believe about themselves as chronically ill? And that if you're not contributing, it's not enough that you're alive, you're a wonderful human being. Of course, you're not a wonderful human being unless you're optimally performing, right? So there's a conundrum. But theoretically, you're a wonderful human being because you're alive and you have value to others. And we keep goldfish. They're not optimal performers. We love our dogs. They're not optimal performers. We feed them and take care of them and love them and we cherish them. But a human being who's not an optimal performer, that's a problem. And there's something that, is they failed somehow. It's like you used to say, well, you failed in life because you got old. You also failed in life because you got a chronic illness. And now our whole culture is being confronted
That's it. Yeah.
with that en masse, right?
Right. Yeah.
Hitting all the families and everybody, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to deal with it. It's
Right.
overwhelming. It costs money, time, effort. It takes you away from the baseball game and the party. Well, not many parties these days, but a lot of the things that you do to manage your own stress, the diversions, the distractions, and
Well,
so that pardon you.
even the realm of the unknown. Like I just posted today on the listserv, Norman Doidge, and he brings up this incredible point. Like, why has everybody gone into a tailspin over the vaccine discussion? Like, why can't we just stick with science and have discussions and admit that we don't know a lot and keep the conversation going? It's almost like when there's an unknown factor, the need to have concrete results, the need to be able to feel secure in our society. I think we're in a very materialistic society. When I traveled through Asia, I was stunned at how many people did not ask me, like their first question was not, what do you do for a living? I mean, I was just
Yeah.
stunned. I was like, why do you care about these other things you're asking me? It was so strange to me, because I was used to being evaluated by how much money I made, what I did, where I had gone to school, that sort of thing. So I think, in the name of science, where neurofeedback is willing to say, you can't just give a diagnosis, you can't just expect a medication to do everything. You got to understand a few things about yourself, your body, science. You need to stay learning and open and curious. And I think that could be part of the COVID thing too, that it's almost forcing us there because there's just a lot of people with long COVID right now, or people who've lost people to COVID who were very capable, healthy people. I mean, I think it's devastated a lot of us. And I think maybe as a society, we do have to be a little more compassionate and a bit more receptive to how science can help, but we're all on a human journey and we're all going to die one day, And so maybe what you're saying, Richard, and what this woman was writing about is as we age, it's the ultimate reminder of death, the ultimate reminder that all of life isn't just productivity. It's not just the slice of time when we're making the most money or, performing job wise.
Well, a lot of the best, a lot of people, famous people, have done their best work in their 70s and 80s and even early 90s. When
Mm-hmm.
you start looking at the list,
Right.
it's like the list of world-changing inventions that came from dreams. It's like we always think of these geniuses as having a magic power, but it turns out this stuff comes to them in their dreams, and then they create it in real life. What was in their dream, and literally that dream they had, like Edison and the light bulb, and so many other things, a benzene ring,
Well, and
And
it's a new world, yeah. And as you said, it's a new world now because even the average population, I was reading, we have never had more people over 50 before in, recorded times. And
oh yeah.
in fact, it's no longer okay to say senior. Now people say boomer. um, but it's really, really, really different than just one or two generations ago. As you said, more and more people are definitely carrying on with their work much later in life as well.
I think I read that we've tripled the age that people live to in 300 years or something like that.
Wow.
Wow.
It's like 3 months a year from that time on over the time. It's profound how much older people are now. And the average age of a person in Rome was 22. It's not unusual to die when you're 22 to 24.
Hmm.
I think, and during the Civil War, it was in the 30s, early 30s, right? Now it's late 70s. Um, and but we see it's like, oh, well, you're going to be decrepit and dragging along, and all your friends are going to die, and you're not going to do anything. You're not going to really put anything out there that's of value, and you're just kind of an annoying burden on the system. When in fact, 77%, I think, of the wealth is concentrated in people over 65, something like that, and they're incredibly productive, and they do a lot of the they they make massive contributions to the social order. But still, that's looking on productivity and contribution. Notice again, there's that the person writing the book is appealing to our sense of meritoriousness, rather
Right,
than
right.
that you love your horse. Some people love their horse more than their spouses. Some people love their dogs more than their spouses. Um, and and when their dog dies, they grieve more than they do for family members. And the dog didn't produce anything. So why should a human being be of less value if they're chronically ill? And they're kind of, well, you're just taking from us, and they feel like I'm taking everything. I'm not producing anything. I'm a burden. I'm in pain, and people get depressed being around them. I mean, in Alzheimer's, the average spouse in Alzheimer's will come down with depression in 2 to 3 years, and most people with Alzheimer's don't last once they're diagnosed more than 5 years. And then they come into your office and say, can you fix this?
Yeah,
And
my family's doctor said it's actually wisest to not tell the person. Um, she said she has seen people live a very happy, blissful. That's what I did with my aunt. She's blissfully just saying that she has a bad memory, but no one has harped on this diagnosis, or no one has sat down. She said she's seen it literally be the entire difference between whether a person dies severely depressed from Alzheimer's or actually blissful. It's amazing.
it's a similar problem we have with mental disorder in general. When we're
That's it. Yep.
people try to uh, have interactions with you as if you were, you know, uh, fully up and going and an optimal performer, and that gets to the point of, well, can't you just stop being sad all the time? Stop thinking all that negative stuff and smile, and the world smiles with you. What's wrong with that? Um, uh, and we hide our diagnoses, where it turns out that younger teenagers now are more savvy about diagnoses than their parents, and in high school and junior high school, they share their diagnoses and they support each other. So it's like gender identity. There's this difference in the way that they relate to their weakness and their vulnerabilities than
Exactly.
their parents are. And
Well,
this is a hard thing to establish as a therapist, with the family. They come in with this, look at this horrible thing that's befallen us and this burden upon us, and they're upset because the person won't respond as if, they they're all functional, whether it's depression, old age, or senility. we have this cultural attitude of, you know, this is an imposition. I need to perform. I need to get out there and produce.
Well,
That's really,
my friend with long COVID, you know, a therapist who can't see any patients, who can't, she can barely, you know, her brain will not compute things. She can't, you know, she barely returns half of any text or message, or she says she can't add anything. She's just like, you know, totally in brain fog, and it hasn't lifted in 2 years. And she's seeing a lot of people. And um, so, yeah, I was just wondering if anyone else has been treating long COVID.
I mean, we've had a few people in our clinic, and I have a family member who's going through that right now. Um, and we're dealing with that, and I know of many other families that are too. Some of our best friends have a young daughter. She's she has 2 children. She's in her mid-30s. She's a nurse. She got COVID taking care of other people as a nurse, and now she can't work, and she was the breadwinner in her family. So their family is devastated because the breadwinner's not there. Uh, the parents have to step in and, you know, with whatever resources they can, try to support that family and help take care of the kids. And of course, her husband is there as much as he can be, but he also has to find some work. So the whole family is devastated. This young family, and who weren't seemed beautiful and healthy are suddenly completely undermined, and the complications are getting worse in terms, because this is not just a virus like an influenza. This is a virus that actually causes blood clotting in all the organs. It attacks all the organs, and everybody gets that attack in a different part of the organ system. And of course, in the brain map, I mean, the body responds to that attack with a pro-inflammatory response, which is good up to a point. But then you get that pro-inflammatory response spreads through the interstitial process and gets into the brain. And then we see, as we've seen from the brain maps that have been shown to us, that we get this generalized slowing in the brain. The alpha slows down. It's just like dementia. The same thing happens. Parkinson's, the same thing happens. The brain doesn't have energy, so it starts to slow down. It starts to lose energy. You start to see more slowed alpha, and then eventually that slowed alpha looks like theta on the brain map. And then you start to see delta increase because of the inflammation. And so we see this process of this slowing. My own mother had dementia, and I went through the whole process with her, but I was fortunate to be trained in psychology and sociology. I knew the full impact it would have on everybody and everything, and I informed everybody, and I worked with the situation. I even did neurofeedback on her, but I came in kind of too late to have a full impact, but it did help. And we found that photic stimulation was tremendously helpful. The staff at the nursing home used it quite a bit to help her manage her day. So we learned that, but you could see the theta and the delta was massive. And I didn't know at the time it wasn't theta, it was slowed alpha. And that's what we miss for so long in looking at the brain mapping of this kind of thing. You'll see the same pattern in chronic fatigue if it gets really bad. You'll see the same pattern in Lyme. People always say, well, what does the map of chronic fatigue look like? What does the map of Lyme look like? And then the next question is, what's the magic protocol that fixes that? And that's only natural that we respond that way, you know. Um, I mean, even the Native Americans have the concept of medicine, and all the ancient cultures. Not Japanese, the Chinese were way more sophisticated about it than most cultures. But we had this, pattern that occurs um, throughout all time, when people get these diseases, and that's inflammatory response, which affects the brain. And so in the brain map, you see them at different stages of the disease. You see a different pattern of brain map. And that's why people say, oh, there's all these subtypes. Well, no, there's not all these subtypes. You're seeing the brain degenerate. Now, it will degenerate in slightly different patterns, and that's what we hope future research will help us understand. Like OCD, for instance, you'll see different patterns of the brain degenerating depending on the person's genetic background. Do they have an APOE4 gene? Well, those people will have a different brain map of dementia, a different trajectory than people of an APOE2 gene, which, those people live forever. And there's only a small percentage of the population who has that. So you're going to see these patterns occur in all of these disorders as the brain degrades based upon how much the brain blood barrier breaks down, how vulnerable it is to viruses that are in the body and bacteria in the body. How much stress is under determines excitotoxicity levels and oxidative stress that can accelerate or um, uh, make the brain map look worse faster and in different ways. So it's a continuum, and we want it to just look one way. Kids with autism are going to have similar issues. You see a lot of delta in kids with autism because there's so much inflammatory processes going on. You see other patterns, a lot of hypercoherence, because the brain's struggling to talk to itself because the brain hasn't formed the type of small world community it needs to function at full efficiency, because the pairing that normally takes place, that process hasn't taken place in a normal fashion between the pathways. So we look at the brain, and we're going to see with COVID, some people will have just some brain fog, and they'll have a lot of alpha because they have mild inflammation, and they may have depression. They may have had a bad experience at the hospital, or been afraid, or they may be very stressed and overwhelmed, and they've got a lot of anxiety, so they have a lot of beta asymmetry in the map. But to the degree that they develop some degree of inflammation, which most of them will, that'll undermine their serotonin production, and that'll result in elevated slowed alpha. And then that alpha will eventually look like theta. And the same thing will happen with dementia, and the same thing will happen with COVID if it's serious enough and people don't recover. Now, if COVID attacks the brain, which it does sometimes through the sinus cavities, and it gets right at your sense of smell, it can get in there faster and accelerate that. You're going to see a different pattern over time than somebody who it doesn't invade that area, but maybe goes more into their lungs and their kidneys or their liver or some other part of their brain. If it attacks their pancreas and gets in there a lot, you're going to see deficits of blood sugar management, and glycogen levels will be off. So you'll see in those people, beta will drop out faster, whereas people where it doesn't affect them that way, the beta may stay fairly strong, but you'll have that high amplitude alpha that's slow. And then eventually that'll look like theta, and you'll see more and more delta. If it gets directly into the brain, you may also see that delta occur faster, so they may develop delta faster or at the same rate they develop slowed alpha. So you're going to see different patterns, and I think that's been the problem with the brain map. And there's still a lot of people out there in neurofeedback and qEEG selling this concept that you can just look at a region of interest and see that it's off and train it. I mean, it's a very primitive way of looking at the brain at this point based on what we actually know. Everything's highly distributed, and everybody responds differently to different disorders and diseases. You see it in Lyme. I've never seen two cases of Lyme the same, and their maps all look slightly different. and the pattern's different. You know, but you can say generally, yeah, you're going to see slowed alpha, and then some people are going to have more theta, and some people have more or less delta. So from my way of thinking, the best thing to do is look at the map, get a sense of the inflammatory process, get a sense of the loss of energy, and then try to train that brain according to the map in general to affect the whole brain, the whole system. Find what protocol in what area moves that whole system. Because from what I've seen, each person has a slightly different response to the same protocol in the same location, because the brain is challenged in slightly different ways. So I think we need to look at a brain as like the weather system, and what can I do in that system? Where can I manipulate that system? How can I add information into that system which will shift the whole system optimally? So in our map system, we list all the locations from worst to least worst, you know, at least the 8 worst ones. And then we pick the top 2 and say, well, let's start here. And, you know, looking at the frequencies, let's try to train these frequencies into a normal range, starting at these locations, and see if that'll move them. If not, let's try the next location. So we'll try many locations because there's nobody in the world, and I keep telling people I'm consulting with, who can predict what protocol is going to have what effect on a given human being or brain map. It's too complex. You have to have a general statistical concept and narrow down the probabilities, and then try several different potential solutions, which is why our system produced so completely differently. So you have somebody with COVID comes in, you can get a sense of how much it's impacted their brain by looking at how much slowed alpha is, how much loss of beta frequency there is, how much delta there is. And if you look at the videos up on our YouTube um, channel, you can see, you know, that our resident neurologist, you know, Rusty Turner, who reads this stuff all the time and presents it, is showing you those maps, and those are the patterns that are showing up. And it wasn't hard to predict. I mean, people ask me, well, what do you think this is going to look like? I have a pretty strong idea what it's going to look like, because it's based upon that oxidative stress stage theory. And that's what you're going to see. But, you know, we are ever hopeful that there's, you know, one solution for one category. And I just think you're going to be disappointed if you go in that direction.
So it sounds like one of the common denominators that you listed several times that would be good for a neurofeedback practitioner to at least have some background in is inflammation, the role of inflammation. It sounds like everything kind of starts to derail there, and to really ask the pointed questions, because everyone, as you said, is going to have inflammation in a different part of their body.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, that's what all this research was showing, you know, and that paper I did on oxidative stress. I mean, I took that information from these brilliant people like Moratini and Wang, and who were doing meta-analysis of these things a decade ago, and they were trying to tell the world this, and that the brain-blood barrier wasn't as strong as you think, and this astrocyte feet leak. And then they found out, well, they leak because they move constantly. That's part of the lymph system of the brain. The brain-blood barrier wasn't what we thought, and it turns out that the brain has a microbiome too, and that there's always bacteria and viruses in there, and we're always fighting them off. So medical history in the last 10 years has been completely rewritten about the brain. And, you know, we were pretty naive about it at the beginning of neurofeedback. What's amazing is that neurofeedback still does this stuff. So here's
I remember this lecture when I first started in neurofeedback. You gave this lecture and it changed my thinking dramatically, this oxidative stress idea. And it really started me on the road to thinking about this from a functional medicine perspective, which I didn't even know how to call it that at the time. To combine, you have to try to repair some of this while you're doing the neurofeedback if you want any level of success, and I
Yes.
think COVID has only brought that even more to the forefront with the impact of COVID on everything in the brain when these long haulers.
Oh, it's absolutely true. And it's just that if you look at functional medicine and the top people in functional medicine, from Perlmutter down, I mean, all the people at Harvard, Yale, Cleveland Clinic, I mean, Stanford, I mean, they're all saying the same thing. Our, our, what we're up against here is the inflammatory response in the body to viruses, bacteria, pathogens, and toxins in our environment. And Lord knows the toxins are worse than the pathogens at this point. And that's because we're so productive. We've produced so well. We've produced a lot of garbage along the way, and we haven't picked it up very well. And so our children are suffering. I mean, look at our lack of will to deal with the climate crisis, which is, I mean, by 2070, 2080, it's going to be hard to live on this planet. Very hard. And everybody's still fighting for their fair share of the pie and beating each other up without, looking at what's around and what's going on. It's partly human nature, but we need to get some better creative solutions. And it's just natural that we respond this way. But when you look at this oxidative stress cycle, this is a rough image. It's just a conceptual presentation. It's way more complex than this. But if I made it more complex, it's hard enough for people to grasp it just looking at this. Why would I make it more complex in presentation? And I have tremendous support on this model, and it's growing all the time. And the research is backing it up too. This is what happens to everybody's brain when it's dealing with stress and the inflammatory response. And the stress can be either excitotoxicity from a psychological or relationships, or it can be toxicity from food or environmental factors. But it all ends up as oxidative stress in the brain. And the brain has to somehow deal with that. And the more it has to deal with that it can't put energy on producing electrical activity. It's trying to just maintain. And you see that in the coherence. When you look at connectivity, you look at coherence, you can see the brain struggling. It's all those red lines in coherence. The more red lines, that more that brain is struggling to fight against this process. And when that coherence diminishes, it's doing well. Younger brains tend to last longer and they can struggle. Even in a person with a lot of anxiety, they're producing a lot of excitotoxicity, and you see a lot of hypercoherence in the map, a lot of red lines in coherence. And as the brain gives up, and we knew this over a decade ago, this was being seen and reported in research, you see more blue in the connectivity. That's where the brain says, screw it, I can't do this. I don't have the resources. And the blue is the brain giving up. It doesn't mean it can't rally back. It just means at the moment it's giving up. So you're also going to see with COVID a lot of blue. But that's not all you're going to see. You're going to see the red. The battle goes on. Some people have more red than blue. Some people have more of a will to live than others. Some people believe that they're going to live more than others. And a lot of times people who come through COVID are the people who have a reason to live, a will to live. And you hear of all these stories in people who die of heart attacks and then they're brought back to life. And almost every single story, I mean, I got bored reading them. It was about them saying, well, I like it here better. Uh, yeah, no bills to pay, no taxes, no motor vehicle departments. But the problem is that you have responsibilities and you have love and you people that you need to care for, and that pulls you back. You have a reason to live. You're connected to a society, and you suddenly realize, wow, the most important thing in my life is being part of that society, helping others, connecting with my friends and my family. And every person I see who goes through a crisis in my office for the last 25 years, I see them learning that lesson, sometimes painfully slow. Sometimes you drag them kicking and screaming with the neurofeedback, and sometimes they just fly through it. But they're all realizing, wow, I have had my emphasis in my life on the wrong place. I'm always running. I'm not stopping enough to smell the flowers, to appreciate what I have. And that's only natural in a consumer society. We're trained from birth to do that. But as we fail to become the star of the show, we begin to have less of a reason for living because we're focused on performing and not on the value of just being. There was a great video called This Emotional Life. I used to show it to my clients all the time. And in This Emotional Life, there's these mothers sitting around talking about their children who, um, have really low IQs or cognitive problems, um, or severe autism. And this group sitting around and saying, well, but my child still has value. That child can still respond to me with love. And you can see these people learning how important that is. The that's really what's important, not just the production, not just being somebody. I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender. Now I'm just some guy on the dock who's wasting his life. I mean, that's in movies and everything, in our society. So this is the map of this is the process of people who failed. They got old, they got COVID, they became alcoholics, drug addicts, they were born with problems, their autism, uh, and you see families carrying this burden, trying to manage it as part of it. So much of my clinical work was just working with the family, trying to get them neurofeedback, trying to get them to learn how to shift the emphasis in their experience of the relationship with the person with mental disorder to see them as having value despite the fact that they had disorder. And Whitaker, who wrote Anatomy of an Epidemic, talks about that in the book. With the advent of drugs, now we just throw drugs at the problem, and we hope that works. But now we're finding out that all these categories of drugs actually accelerate the person's movement into early dementia. So many of the drugs that we're using for mental disorder have that effect, which is ironic because before those drugs came along, the average person with severe depression recovered in a few years and went back to work. A lot of people with schizophrenia recovered enough function to go back and live a normal life. But with the new drugs, they're on an express train to dementia, literally. And that's well documented and has been for several decades now. But you wouldn't think it would be based upon the media and the people coming into your office and the way they struggle with this. So the question is what are people doing about COVID? Are they coming into your office, and what will their map look like? Well, it could be any one of these stages, depending on how hospitalized they were, whether they were intubated, how long they were intubated for, and what their will to live is. And that will also determine how fast they recover and reverse this process, because this process is reversible. We know that. You take people off of gluten, suddenly you see the alpha speed up and the delta drop out for a lot of people who didn't know they had gluten problems. You remove the certain toxins or fight against Lyme and the cofactors. I've had people come in with Lyme and I've trained them, and it's almost like it disappeared. They have almost a normal life, but they have to come in for tune-ups periodically, maybe every couple of years. Other people I've trained with Lyme and it barely moved the needle. What are the factors? It wasn't my equipment. It wasn't my software. It was what drugs they were on, their family environment, you know, their will to live, to get better. I noticed that with all the people who were head trauma, they get blasted from stage 2 to stage 8 just overnight. And even worse, people with a lot of professionals, doctors even I've seen, who've had strokes. They move from 2 to 8. And some of them have a will to live, and I've seen people get up out of wheelchairs, drive their cars, get their license back, get their life back. And I've seen other people with equivalent problems, and they just waste away, and they can't do they don't stay with the neurofeedback more than 5 or 10 sessions.
Richard, a lot of people say that with Lyme's, you just can't get away with not using antibiotics. Have you found that?
It's not. I think it's not black and white. From what I've seen, some people benefit tremendously from antibiotics, and other people don't. And the doctors working on them, the better ones, have very sophisticated methods. They use different antibiotics at different times, whether they're fighting the co-infections like Babesia or they're fighting the Lyme more. And they watch the cycles of each of the co-infections, and they use different antibiotics at different times, and they pull them out and they work on the microbiome when it's most able to recover. So they develop specific strategies for each individual, and they learn how to respond. And some may require no antibiotics, and some may require several at different times.
So microbiome seems to be, because I found also with quite a few mental disorders, not that Lyme's is one labeled as that, but a mental health disorder, the microbiome is everything.
Well, yeah, I think we're having a microbiome love affair right now. We go through different parts of the body and fall in love with solutions at different parts of the body at different times. For a while, it was the brain was going to, you fix the brain in neurofeedback, that was going to fix everything. The brain was the central processor, and if you could just fix the central processor, it was mind over matter, somehow that would fix everything. And there's still a lot of neurofeedback therapists who embrace that. And I wouldn't say that it's not true. There's a lot of truth to it. And mind over matter is profound, but I would move beyond mind and say it's more spirit over matter. But we don't like to talk about that, even in the early 20th century, even though the physicists are starting to say, oh, yeah, this is kind of like, there's some validity to this concept. If you have any questions about science and spirit and how much we've changed, how science has lined up, I mean, we know in physics, everything in the world is connected. Everything is connected. It's impossible not to be. The collapse of the wave function orders and creates change. That's impossible to have change without it. We're in this massive dimension that's literally breathing energetically every nanosecond. And it has a unitary intelligence, otherwise it couldn't coordinate itself. That's undeniable. But and so the mind borrows from that and can navigate it and can. change it. And neurofeedback, it's gives the power to access different states of consciousness, different states of mind. And those different states offer us profound healing sometimes, amazing healing. And yet we also still need support from family and friends. We often need support from certain supplements or medications because of the difference in our ability to embrace that power within us. You know, the Chinese used to call it qi, prana in India. I mean, it's a universal concept. Medicine in Native Americans. There's different ways of naming it, but you know, neurofeedback is a way of training the brain and then ultimately the mind
Mm-hmm.
to alter its relationship to reality, and that difference can make a difference in healing. And yet everybody does it differently to different degrees, and we need support. We need nutrition, sometimes doctors, family members, prayer, you know, lots of things. Singing, laughing. Remember the famous guy who laughed himself out of cancer? That was
Right. That was in the 80s.
in the 80s, and that's happened a lot
Dan
since.
Siegel? Was that Dan Siegel?
I'm trying to remember who it was. Pull up the name, but it was. You know, we've seen that again and again and again. The power to do this. So I think neurofeedback gives us an opportunity to help the brain recover its balance, and in that recovering, we regain our awareness. You know, we strengthen our awareness, our will to live, and our creativity, and with that natural and our intuition, our access to our subconscious processing, which is a real thing. If you're interested, I can give you a stack of books by neuro physicists and neuroimaging people who spend all their life writing books and talking about this.
Yes, Dr. Sudhana here. It is so fun to hear you saying about it's a real thing, but the things is people, if they don't know the chi and prana, they don't understand. Even if we know it's a real thing. So the prana chi can only be increased if they are in a meditative mindfulness CBT. So the heaven, the earth, and the soil, the Mother Earth, three frequencies will be coherent in the alpha band. So basically, the coherence, that's a chi. And you can feel it. The ball is rolling inside of you. That's why we call it as a small heavenly circle. Or if you go into the really deep meditation, you can feel the whole body is in like a grand heavenly circle. So yeah, it is all about chi.
Yeah, but you know, you have to experience that to understand it. And but our science is measuring it. That's the cool thing about modern times, and our technology is allowing us a more efficient way of accessing it. Very hard to learn to meditate. Most people can't do it, but with neurofeedback, you can start to move people into meditative states much easier and get them access to that energy. And that's not woo-woo. I mean, I can go all day long on the science and cite all the physicists, neurophysicists, and everything who are on board. Some of them who were naysayers 20 years ago are like, you know, it's undeniable now. So we're in a great field.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the healing power of it every day. I just had somebody say to me, I had a person come in who's just falling apart, literally. It's Lyme and all these other co-infections. Nobody's been able to put a dent in it or do anything, but neurofeedback has started to give her life back. And that story was common in my clinic and all the clinics. I talk to people, mentor people all the time. It's a common story. It's why I did it. I wanted to be in the presence of miracles.
It's a great
And
sentence.
and I was. It was amazing. I couldn't believe what was happening. So I hope you all have the same experience, but I'd like you to think about these different disorders and diseases in terms of this model of how the body's managing its energy. You could call it its qi. But how does the body manage its energy? And we can see that in the brain map. We can see it's a reflection, a mirror of how the body's learning to manage its energy and how mind is managing itself and its energy. And there's a real physics to it. It's real neurophysics to it. And you don't think Nunez doesn't think about this? You need to read his books. He just wrote one called Brain, Mind, and the Structure of Reality. And it's what that book is about. He's the man when it comes to neurophysics and EEG. And he's got lots of friends who talk to him about it all the time. So
would you give us another book recommendation?
besides that one?
You said Brain, Mind, Structure, and what's another one?
And Structure of Reality. Well, some of them are pretty tough reading, to say the least. Nunez's main book is Electric Fields of the Brain, but it's so much physics and math, I think most clinicians would just fall asleep reading it.
No, more one maybe that has to do with like the chi and the prana, not so scientific.
I could come up with a list if you're interested in those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of physicists who write about it, who write about it for the public, and as it relates to physics. But I think the only people relating the physics to this topic is in the field of neurofeedback. Whether you know it or not, Bob Thatcher is a fascinated student of consciousness in the brain. Eroy John, and he used to argue all the time about consciousness in the brain. Eroy John said to us that he was convinced before he died. He's the guy who invented the brain mapping systems that you use, all of them, at New York Medical University, that there's an ionic plasmic quantum field around the brain that actually contained our memory and our consciousness. And I talked to Carl Pribram, who's he was the pioneering brain surgeon in history, and he wrote the book, The Holographic Mind. And I asked him directly, do you believe what, Eroy John's talking about? And he said, he got angry with me. He said, why the hell do you think I'm here? I'm an old man. That's why I'm here. Because these people are exploring it. You people are the people exploring this. Nobody else is doing it. Well, that got my attention real quick.
All right, I'm going to push us to stop because it's almost 10 after 8, and you need to end your day and relax. I know. I know, it's a great topic. You can go on and on.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I can go on for hours.
No, you're great.
That was great, Richard. Really enjoyed it.
By the way, the laughing guy is Norman Cousins, and it's Anatomy of an Illness.
That's right.
I looked it up too. Right, Norman Cousins.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
Dr. Suter, you're the best. What a wonderful, I wish we recorded and posted on YouTube. What a wonderful speech. What a wonderful, dialogue about the
That's
qi.
what happens. We don't have more
structure.
Okay.
But we will reschedule. We'll reschedule the talk, so we get Rob's influence here on that. And on Wednesday we have a map, so we'll come back and do it all again. We were talking before this, Richard. We were saying, okay, so we'll just see what happens. And look, it was a thrilling Neuro at Night. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for listening. Have a great evening, everybody.